For centuries, political science focused almost entirely on what happened inside government buildings, courthouses, and public squares. Everything else, especially the domestic household, was considered natural, private, and entirely outside the realm of politics. Classical political philosophers built their theories of justice and authority strictly around this public sphere. They operated on the unquestioned presumption that political actors were naturally male, and that women simply lacked the rational capacity to govern themselves. By drawing a hard line at the front door of the home, theorists created the public-private divide. This framework effectively sealed off the household, rendering the power dynamics and inequality within it entirely immune from political scrutiny or legal regulation. That assumption went largely unchallenged until feminist theorists pointed out that personal life is entirely shaped by systemic power. The realization that the personal is political forced the discipline to look past the public square and examine the hidden engines of society. As early as 1884, thinkers like Friedrich Engels, and later Marxist and socialist feminists, argued that capitalism itself relies on a massive, unacknowledged resource: the unpaid reproductive labor of women. In the visible economy, workers sell labor for wages, generating profit. But to keep that loop running, workers must be fed and housed. This renewal happens through unpaid reproductive labor, women's work, a massive economic engine assigned zero exchange value. The domestic sphere is not a peaceful, apolitical sanctuary. It serves as the structural foundation for both economic exploitation and gender hierarchy. Recognizing their exclusion from the public sphere, women began physically organizing. In 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and hundreds of others gathered at the Seneca Falls Convention to demand basic legal recognition as human beings. This first wave evolved into a fierce, decades-long battle across the Western world to secure the right to vote. Women took to the streets, enduring arrest and public backlash to force their way into the electorate. Once the ballot was secured, the mid-20th century second wave shifted focus to institutional barriers. Activists lobbied for legal reforms like the Equal Pay Act of 1963, targeting widespread discrimination in male-dominated workplaces and higher education. The movement quickly escalated from economic demands to campaigns for bodily autonomy. Activists marched for access to contraception and legal abortion, forcing the state to address deeply personal medical decisions. Gaining access to the ballot box and the workplace did not dismantle patriarchy. Integrating women into existing systems exposed deeper, structural inequalities baked into the state itself. As these structural inequalities became obvious, feminist political theory fractured into distinct schools of thought, often referred to as the Big Three: liberal, Marxist, and radical feminism. Liberal feminism, championed by figures like Betty Friedan, focused on institutional reform and integrating women into existing democratic frameworks. Radical feminism countered that those frameworks were inherently patriarchal, requiring a total overhaul of societal roles rather than simple inclusion. Theorist Carol Pateman argued that the classic social contract, the philosophical agreement binding citizens to a government, is actually a sexual contract. She proposed that modern states were designed to ensure men maintained guaranteed access to women's bodies and domestic labor. Yet much of this early theorizing contained a massive blind spot. It centered almost exclusively on middle-class white women. Black feminist leaders, stretching back to Sojourner Truth's speeches in the 1850s, pointed out that mainstream feminism ignored how racial discrimination compounds gender oppression. In 1989, the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw formalized the essential theory of intersectionality. Intersectionality is an analytical framework showing how social identities like race, class, and gender overlap to create unique, inseparable modes of discrimination and privilege. You cannot untangle one form of prejudice without examining the others. True political liberation requires mapping the entire intersecting web of social hierarchies engineered into the state. By the 1990s, this critical lens expanded outward from domestic policy to the global geopolitical stage, creating the subfield of feminist international relations. Traditional international relations theories evaluated the world using strictly male-centric metrics. Scholars measured a nation's strength almost entirely through military power, state security, and aggressive trade alliances. Feminist theorists revealed that global imperialism relied heavily on mobilizing oppressive gender norms. Colonial powers captured populations and markets by exploiting the unpaid labor of colonized women to subsidize their own aggressive expansion. Post-colonial scholars like Chandra Mohanty critiqued Western feminists for homogenizing women in developing nations into a single, powerless archetype, the Third World woman. She demanded a more rigorous, transnational approach that recognized local realities and built genuine political solidarity. Global geopolitics cannot be accurately mapped without tracking the underlying flow of gendered exploitation across borders. We are now in what many call the fourth wave of feminism, an era that began around 2012. Today, the physical boundaries between the public and private spheres have collapsed almost entirely into the digital realm. Activists utilize smartphones and digital networks to build what scholars call claimed spaces. These online environments allow women to confront issues like rape culture and body shaming, problems the traditional state apparatus consistently failed to solve. This digital activism transformed isolated personal trauma into a massive, decentralized global political movement, bringing cyberfeminism out of chat rooms and into the streets. Feminism refused to simply ask for a seat at the political table. It forced us to investigate who built the table and whose unseen labor served the meal. Studying political science without applying a feminist lens ignores half of the human experience, leaving us with an incomplete picture of how power actually operates.